Hello and welcome back to Movie Remake Time, a Filmmaker's Compass podcast, where I don't know what the fuck we do on this show.
Thank you.
I want to say we're watching movies 30 years and older and talk about them, but
I messed you up, man. Got in your head on that.
All right, let's do it. 5, 4. Hello, and welcome back to Movie Remake Time, a Filmmaker's Compass podcast, where we take a look at sequels, reboots, and remakes and ask the very simple question, who did it better? I'm CP, this is D-Man, and this week we are going to be talking about, two reboots to one of the greatest movies ever, Ghostbusters. And those, in fact, are Ghostbusters Answer the Call from 2016 and Ghostbusters Afterlife, which just came out a few weeks ago in the movie theaters. D-Man, let's get into this.
Yeah, this is actually an episode that I've been waiting to do because we had Ghostbusters Afterlife marked on our calendars. And even though, this does come up on this show because we talk about the new movies that are coming out, Dune, we still have, Matrix pegged for later. And I think Top Gun, we're waiting for some of these movies. It's very exciting. And Ghostbusters Afterlife was one of those movies. We wanted to see, right? They have now kind of officially rebooted Ghostbusters twice. So there's the 2016 female-led complete reboot. It literally takes a lot of the plot points from the original 1984 Ghostbusters. And it does have a different spin on the whole thing. It's not, they don't have the same names or, they're not the same characters per se, but it's a lot of the same plot beats, locations, things like that.
Yeah.
And then now we have Ghostbusters Afterlife, which is a sequel. If you're, listening, I have my, air quotes up, but it's a sequel, but really another reboot. And this one doesn't really follow the exact plot beats, but it borrows heavily, right, from the original. So even though the location, the characters, everything appears different, there are a lot of elements that are the same. So it's fascinating because, a third Ghostbusters movie has been in the works for probably close to 30 years. So
at least,
84. And then I don't know what year the sequel, Ghostbusters 2, came out, but the Ghostbusters Answer the Call came out in 2016 and Afterlife came out in 2021. So, people have been waiting patiently for a Ghostbusters sequel for about 3 decades.
Yeah. Ghostbusters, just for the audience out there, before you start telling us we don't know what we're talking about, Ghostbusters 2 was 1989.
Okay, there we go. So even though, that would put it about 25 years roughly. The point is that people have been waiting for this. And so I guess, and we'll go ahead and preface this. Why did a Ghostbusters 3 with the original cast not happen? And apparently, after doing research for this episode, I found out that Bill Murray was, pretty non-committal about doing a sequel, even though Dan Aykroyd's been in favor of it for years. He's been working on, a treatment, a script. They've, had it in the works for a very long time. Because they couldn't get full commitment from the entire Ghostbusters crew, they ended up deciding not to make it.
Mm-hmm.
So that led Sony to just go ahead and say, you know what, if, everybody's getting older now, it doesn't really seem like a viable option. We're going to go ahead and remake the original Ghostbusters, and we're going to bring in 4 new comedians. So that was the start of the reboot process. But okay, before we dive into the elements of the different movies and how they stack up, something I want to talk to you about is fan bases. All right.
Yeah.
So you have a fan base, and let's face it, Ghostbusters, and we talked about this because we did a total rewind on Ghostbusters. The iconography and the cultural influence that Ghostbusters had is massive because, right, look, if you look at CP's shirt, if you're a listener and you can't see it right now, he's got the Ghostbusters logo. Well, okay, if you're listening right now, I guarantee you probably know what that logo looks like. It's a ghost in the cancel symbol. And it's funny because the influence was so high that, Ghostbusters fans still exist to this day. And even though it's gone through different iterations that weren't movies, the cartoon, video games, things like that, that kind of kept the fandom going, people wanted another movie.
Mm-hmm.
So here's what I want to get to. They decided to reboot it. And the moment they announced that it was going to be 4 female Ghostbusters, the backlash was very severe. And I wanted to ask you, having watched the film again, do you think that that actually has anything to do with the poor reception? Or, was it just not the best movie?
That's a good question. I mean,
because if you
right.
want, I'll kick it off where I will say that I think it being female driven actually did influence people's perception of the film. It had this kind of negative connotation attached to it as it was being promoted. Now, whether or not, I know people talk about like toxic fandom and this and that, whatever. The point is that, unfortunately, I think it did hurt the film's performance, where if the studio had handled it maybe a slightly different way, they might have been able to actually get those people maybe more on board with a reboot. But they didn't.
Well, I think you're correct. I mean, considering that these are some of the, leading comedians of, the time that this film was made, they so happen to be female, right? Sony never seemed to present this as, hey, new comedians for a new generation, right? I think that
I
at
totally
some
agree.
point, a Hollywood Reporter article or something came out that talked about female Ghostbusters. And I think that society started kind of just spinning this thing out of control, which is, this is, Sony's attempt to, make the Ghostbusters woke, and I don't want to be any part of it. As opposed to if they had just said, hey, like, I mean, these comedians are huge, and,
they're stars in their own
SNL,
right.
They're leading,
there's some from
blockbuster comedies from the
stand-up comedians.
Yeah, this is not just a run-of-the-mill, like, hey, look, we're just casting these as female actors. These are comedians who happen to be women.
Right. And I think it's interesting because had the narrative been that they wanted to find some top comedians, and guess what? It happened to be female. I think people would have been like, okay, like this could still be really funny. It could be really good. Whether it is or not, we'll dive into that later. But the problem was that the way the public received the reception to the news of a female-driven Ghostbusters was that the only reason they were doing it was to make them female.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think, that was a narrative I don't think obviously they were prepared for. I don't think they anticipated that type of reaction. And that is probably not a fair reaction, right? Even though it happened.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that I think as a studio, you have to be aware of your fandom, and you have to be aware of how you go about doing these things. Because, for instance, another movie that was like universally just anticipated was Star Wars Force Awakens.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because, here's my Star Wars reference again. It's like every episode. But like the anticipation for Star Wars was high. And, Disney's marketing team and Lucasfilm had been able to, really connect with the fan base leading up to that film. And whatever your opinions are on Force Awakens, they did a great job of getting people on board with this, quote unquote reboot.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, watching the film, I don't think that it being female driven actually affects the outcome. I think these are really great comedians. So where I know, some people are going to jump in and be like, oh yeah, it's just, the woke mob trying to, insert X here and do this and that. And I'm like, I didn't get that vibe. I felt like it was just like Ghostbusters. They got Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd. Now, granted, the other two aren't necessarily known for huge comedic chops at the time, but they were all really funny in the original Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
Egon and Winston.
I mean, that's definitely part of the issue. I do think it's funny because when you look at the reviews of the 4 Ghostbusters films, actually the second highest reviewed film is Ghostbusters Afterlife. Obviously, the first one is the original. But it was a blockbuster failure. And part of it is probably...
Wait, you said Afterlife. Are you talking about Answer the Call?
Yeah, sorry, everybody. Ghostbusters Answer the Call is the second highest rated film. Okay. Afterlife is third, and then Ghostbusters 2 is the lowest. Now, yeah, it was... Answer the Call was a box office failure, where Afterlife seems like it is a huge success. And I don't know that it's necessarily the sex thing. I think the other part of the coin that we didn't talk about yet is the fact that I think for a fandom, we have wanted to see a Ghostbusters movie that is closing the chapter on 4 characters that we love. And the outright reboot did not give us the closure that we wanted. It didn't give us that moment of getting to see 4 Ghostbusters on the screen, busting ghosts one last time before they die. And I think especially for fans watching Ghostbusters Answer the Call, when you're like, you mean you managed to get Bill Murray in this, you managed to get Dan Aykroyd in this, right? You managed to get Ernie Hudson in this. Why couldn't we get them into a Ghostbusters movie? I don't understand, right?
Yeah. And I assume, a part of it is, Egon had passed away, Harold Ramis.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm sure there's an element of like when you're younger and you're this huge movie star, you're probably like, oh, if the time's ever right,
mm-hmm.
You're kind of thinking to yourself, like, I don't want to do that right now. And then with the passing of, I guess, one of your co-stars, and realizing that you're getting older and kind of like, if we are ever going to do this, we should probably do it now. And I think, obviously a lot of reports have pointed to Bill Murray as kind of being that person. He was the holdout who wasn't necessarily in favor of coming back. And I get it. Like, a lot of stars say that they don't want to make sequels or revisit past work unless there's a really kind of good reason to. And you just brought up that reason. Closure.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Afterlife gives fans and the franchise, is a sense of closure for the original Ghostbusters, and almost this sense of passing the torch to a new generation that can now, we can now make movies that don't have the original cast because we got the closure we all wanted.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that is something that, again, I look right at Star Wars here. And, I remember seeing they had like a table read photo of all the original stars and the new cast all together.
Yeah.
Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford, Carrie Fisher, Peter Mayhew, Kenny Baker, Anthony, like they're all there. Anthony Daniels. It was amazing. And yet in 3 movies, they were unable to bring that cast together, to get them all together, whether it was on the Millennium Falcon or they were at the Rebel base. They couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, during those 3 films, unfortunately, Kenny Baker, Peter Mayhew, and Carrie Fisher all passed away. And Billy D. Williams, Lando Calrissian did join later. But to your point, I don't think Star Wars was truly able to give the fans that closure that they wanted. And when we look at Afterlife, and especially that final showdown.
Oh, that's what we've been waiting for 40 years.
Yeah, and like, I get it. The guys are old. They were old in Star Wars too.
Mm-hmm.
So like they show up, they actually have this shot where the, Gozer does like her shocks or whatever. Oh, I said her, but they actually, again, reference that she's not a she. But Gozer sends shocks out and they all get knocked over. But even when I was in the movie theater, I was like, of course, those are stuntmen. Like, there's no way they made these old guys like, throw their bodies on the line for one stunt. But being able to do that, I think, elevates Afterlife over the new reboot even though, I actually am not in the camp. I didn't hate the new reboot. I actually enjoyed it. I mean, it doesn't hold a candle to the original Ghostbusters, but I didn't think it was as bad as everybody said. So, I mean, I'm going to throw it over to you here. You did.
Oh, I hate Ghostbusters Answer the Call. I hate it so much. In fact, watching it for this podcast was like the most painful thing I have done. It was like, I think the thing that really bothers me is I love Kristen Wiig. I love Kate McKinnon.
Yeah.
And
they're very talented, very funny.
Just
on SNL,
watching it, for me, I don't know that the jokes land and they don't seem to flow as naturally as they do in the first one. But I think my bigger issue with Ghostbusters Afterlife is it seems void of the heart.
You said Afterlife again, but you're talking about Answer the Call.
I'm talking about Answer the Call. I love Ghostbusters Afterlife, for the record. When I watch Ghostbusters Answer the Call,
yes,
it's missing the heart of the original Ghostbusters.
Okay.
And there's something relatable. We talked about this on the Total Rewind episode. We can all understand these guys. We've been there when we've lost out on big opportunities and we've ventured out on our own, trying to do something new. And there's an energy and there's a magic and there's something lovable and relatable in the original Ghostbusters. I don't feel like it is there in Ghostbusters Answer the Call. I will tell you, though, I think Afterlife, though it's very different than the original Ghostbusters in tone, style, type of story, does a better job of tapping into that heart of the original Ghostbusters.
Yeah, I have to agree. I mean, like you said, Afterlife is interesting because they no longer set Ghostbusters in New York City. They're setting it in, where was it, Oklahoma?
Yeah, Oklahoma. It's not set up as a comedy first and foremost, right?
Right. Yeah. It's kind of more of an adventure. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's like a coming of age adventure, and it has humor and it has heart, but it's used much more sparingly, where even the original Ghostbusters, I mean, it's a comedy.
Yeah.
Right. And it's it has it's a high concept comedy, but it is a comedy.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't, oh my God, there's so many, we already did it. We did that episode. I won't dive into original Ghostbusters, but Afterlife, something else that I thought really kind of worked was that they actually had it be descendants of Egon from a story standpoint to kind of connect these kids and this younger generation to the older generation.
Yeah.
So they weren't just like, hey, we're going to start up Ghostbusters again and raise, funding it. And, it was like, no, I mean, they're actual descendants of Egon in the story. So I thought that worked really well.
Yeah.
But what do you think of moving Ghostbusters out of New York? That was a little jarring.
Well, I mean, it's not Ghostbusters, but again, this is not the original Ghostbusters film. And I think part of the problem when we watch Answer the Call is they're trying to recreate the original Ghostbusters, right?
It's just you're going to fail.
Right? Exactly.
You know what? I take that back. There was one instance where I remember saying that. I was like, you're going to fail. And I was wrong. And that was when Christopher Nolan decided to bring back the Joker. And I'm not even talking about the casting of Heath Ledger. I just remember they were bringing back the Joker. And I was like, ooh, bad decision. I was like, Batman has, so many villains to choose from. And I was like, you're going to pick the Joker again. Like, no one's going to top Jack Nicholson. Don't even try. And, for everyone that does try to top that great original, I mean, every once in a while we get that diamond in the rough and you get, Heath Ledger's Joker, which was incredible. So
no, absolutely.
I mean, seems like, I guess what I'm saying is it seems like a no-brainer, like don't do it. But sometimes someone's vision is good enough to, really kind of blow us away. But I get what you're saying. When you look at Answer the Call and you look at the original, I mean, they didn't get it.
Well, and I think that this goes into another thing we hate about studios, which is once you decide to reboot a property, and we've talked about this a lot, right? How do you walk the line between respecting what came first, right? And respecting the existing property and letting fans know that you respect it, versus kind of that nostalgia for the sake of nostalgia, fan service approach that it seems like a lot of studios get caught up in. And there's a few things that have navigated that really well, but it's a very fine line to walk.
Yeah, it is hard because, that was something that I actually had a little issue with when it came to Force Awakens, Star Wars again. But I felt that they had these cameos by the original cast, and they were these great kind of little moments in the film, but they felt more like they were, there to get the audience to be like, oh my gosh, rather than, right, like, when, like, for instance, Han and Chewie board the Falcon and the whole audience erupts. He's like, Chewie, we're home. But the characters on the Falcon don't know those guys.
Yeah.
That was more for us, I think.
Yeah.
That moment than it was necessarily, to serve the story per se. And that's a problem I think Ghostbusters Afterlife does struggle with a little bit. They are recycling a lot of elements from the original, particularly the villain. What is it? Evo Shandor, Gozer. They reuse, the Zool line and the dogs. I mean, they're constantly doing these kind of reveals throughout the film, whether it's Ecto-1 or a proton pack, a trap. They're constantly kind of like planting these things. And I did feel like a couple of the times I was kind of like, listen, guys, you're really lingering on this build up to the reveal of what's under the sheet. And I was like, I think we all know.
Yeah.
I don't know that it needs to be so drawn out and build so much anticipation for something. I'm like, dude, we came to a Ghostbusters film. Like we know.
Yeah. No, you're right.
So, but I do feel like in that sense, Afterlife uses those elements, but it's really doing it in a way that's trying to build on what was before and also present something familiar because it feels so fish out of water being in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
So they actually do it quite well, I would say.
Well,
kind of has. Yeah, go ahead.
No, and I think when you compare it to Answer the Call brings forth those same elements, right? 3 of the original Ghostbusters reappear. The Secretary reappears. The Stay Puft Marshmallow Man reappears, right? We see Ecto-1. We see the original Ghostbuster building. Like, there's the same logo. There's Slimer. All these things that we know from the first one. But part of the problem is they almost feel solely there for the sake of fan service to be like, look, like, hey, look at this. This is a cool nod to the movie you really thought you were seeing.
Yeah, it is Ghostbusters,
So
it's a tough line to walk because you want to be able to get the fans excited. You want them involved. But yeah, at the same time, you don't want to do things just for the sake of doing them. And I do feel like I said, being descendants of Egon, his grandkids and his daughter, it does make those moments more impactful because they're learning about their lineage rather than just like, oh, we happened to stumble, like we bought the old building and found this shit in the basement.
And from a story point, right, the fact that we're resurrecting the villain of Gozer again, some of those callbacks to the original are rooted in the events of the film. So they do have more justification for being there for that reason.
Totally agree. And I didn't hate the resurrection of Gozer. Unfortunately, I don't think Gozer was used any differently than in the original. Just kind of like a stand-in villain. They didn't really add a new dimension or something unique. It was kind of like, I'm back,
Yeah.
Same exact thing, even to the degree that like they literally had Gozer look the same, even though there are explicit lines that Gozer can be whatever it wants to be.
Yeah, right.
And yet apparently it wants to be the exact same thing. So I was kind of like, I guess, we could have seen Gozer take a different form, but I think the big culmination obviously was getting to that point where the original Ghostbusters showed up. And again, they're having fun. They're repeating lines from the original, but that's why they're there, right? That's if you're ever going to do that, that's the moment to do it.
Yeah. And and then obviously there's the final shot, which I think kind of bookends for an audience what we've been waiting for, which is we just want to see the Ghostbusters one more time.
Yeah.
And we got it.
So I don't know, something else that stands out to me, I did feel like, if we're comparing the two, I felt like Answer the Call definitely embodies the comedy aspect with much more respect to the original than the new one. And I know you hated the jokes, but I found part of it funny. And I thought, that was a standout, which was this one. It definitely felt more fast paced, more comedic. It definitely felt more like the original in its style, where the Afterlife definitely did not.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. The other thing that really weirded me out about Answer the Call is the color grading. It's almost like Batman Forever-esque if you watch it. Like I was watching and I was like, this is just really weird decisions that they made. And I don't know why. What was that guy's name?
Joel Schumacher?
Yeah. Maybe they they're like, hey, Joel, like give us some advice on how to do the color palette on this one.
It was very bright. It was like a vibrant color palette.
Yeah.
I mean, something else I want to say about that Oklahoma town in Afterlife, it apparently was always either sunrise or sunset is what it looked like. At least that's when all the events happened.
True. That's interesting. Very interesting.
So what'd you think of Muncher as the stand-in for Slimer? I kind of liked it because at first I didn't get it. I was like, okay, cool ghost, right? Which I like. I think you got to add, it's Ghostbusters. You got to add some cool ghosts. So I was like, okay, that's cool. But then to use it as a plot device, I was like, all right, there we go.
I thought that was cool. Jason Reitman was very determined. He thought that the Slimer character, he has a line where he's like, Slimer is like kind of like he's sort of a nasty dude in the first Ghostbusters. And over time, he's been watered down into a joke. And I think in the cartoon, right, he's even sort of like their like sidekick pet at the,
I know. He's like a firehouse dog.
Yeah. So I think he kind of wanted to reinvigorate sort of the spirit of the original Slimer, sliming people and stuff. I thought it was a good choice. It was, again, a nod. We knew it was this version's Slimer. And I did like that it worked in the story. So I don't have any issues.
So the last thing I wanted to ask you, not the last thing, but the next thing I wanted to ask you was, what do you think of kids versus adults? So the shifting of the main characters kind of becoming these young kids, middle school, high school age kids. I think the oldest being the girl that worked at the restaurant. She was 17, down to 15, Yeah. What'd you think of that? Because that's interesting if they're going forward. These aren't right, because the way the original Ghostbusters is, they're almost presented as like entrepreneurs or small business owners, right? Yeah. They're not necessarily old enough to like pick up that mantle yet. So what do you think of that?
I thought it was a creative decision. I think there was a lot of intention behind it. For one, Afterlife ended with the setup for, it seems like a sequel will be coming, right?
Right.
And I can only think that part of the idea is we can still involve these older Ghostbuster characters if it involves them kind of continuing to mentor and pass the torch on to the next generation. And if it's going to be the next generation, make them be young so you can milk a couple movies out of them. But I also think this is a very conscious decision by the studio to kind of tap into the Stranger Things effect that we see so many things leaning into over the last 5 years. I mean, so much to the point that they're casting Stranger Things.
Yeah, I was going to say, they literally have one of the Stranger Things characters in this movie. But yeah, I think it was a great change of direction. Because it has the sense of, I guess, new stories, right? No matter how it goes after this, it's going to be a new kind of fun adventure. And that's great because we had our passing of the torch moment now. And right, Ghostbusters can live on, the iconography, all the stuff. But, I think when we were talking earlier about, studios rebooting franchises, this is the movie that you need to transition to your new stuff. Because I ultimately, right, I know obviously we said earlier, like it being kind of a woke, turn the Ghostbusters into girls type scenario. Honestly, I think if you were to cast even male comedians, they're just never going to live up to the original in this sense. It's, if you're just going to remake it, that's a tall order.
Exactly. And I think that's the problem. And if these 4 female actresses had come in under a story device, which is, picking up where the old Ghostbusters left off.
Yeah.
I think it would have been received very differently than what is almost an attempt to just remake something that you really don't need to remake because it's freaking perfect.
Yeah. I've always said, like Star Wars: A New Hope. I'm like, don't remake it. Wizard of Oz. It doesn't need to be remade. If you want to do a different spin on it or you want to do a Broadway play, like I get it. Romeo and Juliet has been converted and redone. Great stories get repackaged all the time. I'm not hating on that. But like if you're just going to, remake A New Hope, I just don't see it. And that, Ghostbusters is one of those movies. It's kind of like if I was to tell you, like, yo, they're going to remake Back to the Future. You're like, why? Why would you do that?
Well, right. And as fans, we dealt with this 10 years ago and they told us they were going to reboot Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
We're like, great. We would all love to see Indiana Jones. He is everyone's favorite character. And then when we went to see it, it didn't feel like Indiana Jones. It was a different tone. It was a different style. It was clearly trying to set up the continuation of the Indiana Jones storyline with a new character. And as audiences, we just didn't buy it. We didn't want to have it.
Yeah. And you're talking about 4 Kingdom of Crystal Skull.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Can we just acknowledge, like, as much as I know they wanted to pass the baton to like Shia LaBeouf, don't name your character Mutt. I just, that is not, I hate that. Like, that is just tough.
Well, and like with that movie, right? Like the first scene opens up with Indiana Jones's hat blowing and he puts it on and you hear the theme and you're like, yes, this is Indiana Jones. And that is the peak. And from that moment, they just keep chipping away at everything that we love from the first 3 Indiana Jones films. And I don't know what the studio's rationale is, but again, they needed this approach that Afterlife took, which is, hey, we're going to pass off the mantle, but it's still going to hold true to what fans originally wanted.
Yeah. What's crazy is I remember watching Indiana Jones 4 and they did that scene with the ants where they're all CG. And I was like, this is totally unbelievable. And then I went back and watched, what was the second one? Temple of Doom. Yeah. And like they have this opening scene where they're on a raft, and I was like, oh shit, I was wrong. I was like, they've been doing wild shit this whole time. Like they literally like go off a waterfall where you're like, you would die. I mean, there's just no way.
I think they ride the raft down outside of the airplane and like slide down the mountain all the way to like the valley below.
It's like ridiculous. I was like, so I guess I was wrong. I was like, this doesn't feel like Indiana Jones at all. And then I went back and watched Temple of Doom and I was like, oh God, they weren't great. They weren't all great. It was really just 1 and 3. And I mean, Temple of Doom is good in its own respects, which I don't remember this as a kid, but did you know Temple of Doom is actually like a prequel?
Yeah. It takes place like 10 years before Raiders.
What the hell?
Dude, you got to watch your movies, man.
No, I mean, I've known this for a while now, but I remember as a kid, I always thought it was a sequel.
Well, it came after, so I guess.
That
was the thought process there.
Never gave it much thought. I was like, stupid. But yeah, anyway, getting back to going to see Afterlife. I mean, I can say at least when it comes to Afterlife, I got to see that one in theaters. Answer the Call, I rented and watched at home. So, I think the theater experience, if you get a chance, obviously enhances just how you perceive the movie. Because I don't know about you, but even watching Answer the Call at home this last week in preparation for the podcast, like, I had my phone, people called me during it. It was like a thing where I'm like, you don't get to sit there and just total bliss. So, I mean, first of all, I just love going to movie theaters, but
nice plug.
Yeah. Miss you, Movie Pass.
So I have a question for you, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about how, I mean, it's really kind of interesting, right? Because Ghostbusters 2 is kind of the typical sequel, right?
Mm-hmm.
It kind of tries to hit the beats of the original. It's not as successful in most regards. No one thinks it's better than the original, but you're like, okay, I mean, we get to see the same characters again, right? Then with Ghostbusters Answer the Call, they did what studios dread. They made the monumental mistake of trying the reboot that failed miserably.
Mm-hmm.
And with Afterlife, they seem to have got it right. So it's really kind of an interesting study in, franchise management, because they sort of have done it all at this point.
Yeah.
My question to you is, can you think of some other properties that have successfully walked the line of rebooting?
I can. Two of the biggest ones that really stand out to me are Batman and James Bond.
Okay.
So again, when Christopher Nolan took over Batman, what he really did was he went back to comic book origins, and he brought a kind of, I think a lot of people actually, when Batman Begins came out, they were like, this is like if Batman was real. But going, as we mentioned earlier, from the Joel Schumacher films and Arnold Schwarzenegger as Mr. Freeze, I mean, the shift in tone and the respect that was then paid to the comics and the character really endeared itself to audiences, I think.
Yeah.
And it's funny because if you actually look at James Bond and Daniel Craig, in a lot of respects, it's the same thing. They actually go from that Pierce Brosnan, like kind of cartoonish, right? Yeah. He always has like these crazy new, cars and tools and weapons. And he's going to like ice palaces, and they're surfing into, war zones, and like it's like outlandish. And then they reground it, almost immediately in Casino Royale in the first 10 minutes in that chase sequence, where it's like, yo, this is what this is going to be like. You're not going to see all this, crazy stuff. It's going to be me punching a guy or jumping off a crane or,
Yeah.
But I think in both those instances, the reason why it worked was because the artists that were in charge of the story went back to the origins of what made each of those characters great.
Okay. I think that's smart. Yeah.
And it's hard. It's hard to do. We've seen Spider-Man rebooted twice. There's the Sam Raimi, then the Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, and now Tom Holland Spider-Mans. And they all actually kind of have a unique take. They're very different. And who knows, we might see them all together in about 3 weeks. But, I just dated this podcast. But anyway, it's hard though, because, if you're trying to do something different, which I think, for instance, Batman Forever is trying to do, it's trying to separate itself from the Tim Burton Batmans.
Yeah.
Which, mad props to those movies. It's amazing. They really did go different. And it's funny because if you actually go back and look at the, kind of contemporary reviews, and especially how us as, younger kids at that time saw those movies, they weren't poorly receptive, right? Even I think we talked about when we did the James Bond, Pierce Brosnan's Die Another Day versus No Time to Die. Even if you go back and look at contemporary reviews, they didn't hate it. And now it's like, if you watch it, I would assume most critics would be like, yeah, this isn't very good.
Yeah.
But, so you it's like franchises kind of have to go through this in order to kind of get back to the origins of what made something great.
Okay. Interesting.
So I mean, what about you? Like, what do you think? What's another franchise that stands out to you as something that was, able to reboot something successful?
Um, I have two off the top of my head. I think one was with the Rocky series.
Mm.
Obviously, it kind of became a joke. The latter Rockies were so absurd and just not. You're like, okay, Stallone's like 70. Why is he still in the ring? And so when they introduced the Creed films following up, it got back to, as you said, kind of what made the original Rockies endearing. And it was that kind of very human story about, this guy down on his luck and overcoming and fighting to, and the Creed stories got back to that. And I thought that was a great one. Another one that I think's done it really well, yeah. Which also we talked about in the early days of this podcast, the Fast and Furious films. I think in that one, the producers are very aware of what audiences want. And we have seen the evolution from this underground street racing film to this essentially global spy thrillers, because they know that as audiences, what we want to see is we want to see our cast and we want to see them going around the world and doing bigger, badder, more ridiculous things. And within those movies, they know that in most cases, audiences don't really care about the realism. They want to have the fun. And they have leaned into that through each of the now kind of three, different iterations of Fast and the Furious through the 10 movies.
Well, it's fascinating you bring that up because Fast and the Furious itself has been rebooted almost in real time. We were talking about Ghostbusters having 25-ish years, between the last sequel and the next movie. And that's interesting because, like you said, that's a studio having, the pulse of their franchise in the moment. They're not losing it. They're making it better as they go. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that's been remarkable to watch because I don't know how, I'm not exactly sure how much movies or how much money that franchise has made, but it's one of the most successful movie franchises of all time. I think it's top 10.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Which is wild. That's wild. You know what else is wild is that top 10 probably is also Transformers.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess those movies made a crap ton of money too.
Well, but again, and when you compare one of the most recent films, the Bumblebee film, right? It's kind of that same thing. Like, let's reset it and get back to more of something more akin to what this fan base wants.
Yeah. And then I guess, if we're going to end it, I wanted to talk a little bit just about fan bases and their expectations. How do studios, because I think Star Wars, again, is a great example, but for this podcast, because we're going to do Star Wars on this show. We're going to have that episode, and it's probably going to be like 2 hours long. We're probably also going to do an accompany episode where we just watch it and record ourselves watching it. But for this, the Ghostbusters franchise, and when you look more specifically at the fan base, you have to walk a line between giving fans what they want, but also giving them something they never knew they wanted. Mm-hmm. And that's probably the hardest thing to accomplish because most of the time, right, people think they know what they want, but they, again, Heath Ledger's Joker.
Yeah.
Everybody's like, hey, listen, we know what we want. And it's Jack Nicholson as a Joker. It's amazing. But they're like, no, listen, we know you guys, you want the Joker because he's awesome, but we can't do Jack Nicholson. So they come up with this different take, but you're like, wow, blow me away.
Yeah.
I don't know that Ghostbusters Afterlife or Answer the Call necessarily got all the way there to where everybody was like blown away and like, oh, here we go. Like, this is so dope. I cannot wait for the next one.
Yeah.
I think the problem was that Answer the Call didn't get people excited for the franchise, right?
Yeah.
Afterlife did. I think they have successfully gotten people invested in the future of the franchise. And whatever that takes, whether all the characters are coming back, and I have to give a big shout out. What was the little girl's name in Afterlife? Chloe? Phoebe. Excellent performance. She stole the show. And okay, can we also acknowledge that we had female Ghostbusters in Afterlife, and they were awesome. So that argument is basically a fallacy. Like, what does that matter? She was incredible.
True.
And
yeah, no, that's a good
I
point.
thought she stole the show. She was my favorite character. And, I look forward to hopefully seeing her in future Ghostbusters sequels. But, I think where Afterlife succeeds, but didn't necessarily blow us away, was that they were able to, kind of get us excited again. Mm-hmm. But, it's not going to win any Oscars. And there's nothing as iconic as the Joker.
Yeah.
They didn't necessarily, knock it out of the park, but I'm excited again. And that's a good thing. And, I think at a minimum, when you're trying to, get a franchise off the ground again, that's about the best you can do. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think, the 2016 Ghostbusters, if it had just been, approached a certain way, I think they could have gotten it there with respect to the original, but it just doesn't get people excited. I don't think. I think you watch it and you're kind of like, oh, it was good. I mean, whatever. Or, if you're like, it was bad. But it doesn't necessarily get you to be like, oh man, I want to come back for more. And that's where Afterlife succeeds to me.
I think that's a great point. And I think that kind of highlights the difference between the two.
So,
and why people are psyched about the proposed Afterlife sequel, where they weren't about the proposed, Answer the Call sequel.
Yeah. And can we just say that scene where the one kid drives the Ecto-1 through the field? I was like, if you've ever driven through a field, there's just no way. Like it would never be that butter smooth. Like you would be bouncing all over the place. It'd be wild.
Good point.
I've driven off-road.
On that same note, can we also give a shout out to Thor himself for being so freaking awesome in Answer the Call and such a comedic genius?
Oh yeah, he was hilarious. He was a highlight. And you could tell like he was just loving this kind of new role instead of being Thor.
Yeah.
And even when they, kind of turn him evil at the end and all that, like I really liked it. I thought Chris Hemsworth just knocked that one out of the park. He was really funny. And like I said, I certainly didn't hate Answer the Call as much as, Rotten Tomatoes would have you believe, or CP.
Sorry, America. Just not a fan.
So, I guess, it's very rare, I guess, that I truly like hate a movie. I'm trying to think, what's a movie I hate?
I don't know.
Yeah, it's rare. So even that one, I found things to like in it. But yeah, I'm looking forward to sequels. So, obviously we get to the end of our episode and we ask ourselves, which one did it better? And I think I'm going to have to go with Ghostbusters Afterlife.
Well, obviously I'm going to say the same thing. Audience, if you haven't checked it out, you should. It's fun getting to see Ghostbusters in theater again. So take advantage of it.
If they put the 1984 Ghostbusters in theater again, I would pay to go see that.
Dude, I know.
I've never seen Ghostbusters on the big screen. And I know it's out there because they do it around Halloween. The closest I've ever come is there used to be it's still there. I actually just went this year, but there's a haunted house back home in Indiana called Niles Haunted House. And they always put up a big screen and they play like a Halloween movie, during that season. And one time it was Ghostbusters. And I went and we went through the haunted house and then we got to watch it on the big screen. And it's pretty awesome. It was
amazing.
Yeah, now I got to see it in a theater though.
Dude, that would be fun.
This was basically in the middle of a field in the middle of nowhere.
Well, did you drive the Ecto-1 to get there?
No, I did not. Although I think I have a picture with the Ecto-1 at is it Universal or somewhere they had like a replica? Even though that's probably it's not a Universal movie, but I think I saw it somewhere. I got a photo as a kid. Did you ever have the toy Proton packs?
Oh, dude, totally. I had the Proton packs. I had the
slime
packs. Yeah.
Yeah, I loved
action
Ghostbusters,
figures,
man.
The pajamas. Yeah, man.
Yep. Ghostbusters are the best. So, all right. Well, we'll throw it to you guys, our listeners, and let us know what you think. If you've had a chance to see both movies, which one do you think did it better? But if you haven't seen both movies, but maybe you've seen one or the other, how do you think they compare to the original? And more importantly, how do you think the studios handled the kind of reboot aspect? Because this is really one of those great examples of like how to get it right and how to get it wrong. So I'm curious what everybody else's thoughts are. And this is going to be an ongoing debate, right? Franchises get rebooted all the time. Who knows? Maybe we will get that Back to the Future reboot. I'm pretty sure we probably will. But let us know your thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast and leave us a 5-star review. You can find us on the Apple Podcasts as well as the Google Podcasts app. And you can subscribe on YouTube and find us on all the major social media channels. If you're unsure of exactly what to type in, just go to Google and type in Filmmakers Compass Podcast, and our website and all the links will be there. So, CP, I'm going to throw it over to you. Let's go ahead and...
on that note, thanks for talking Ghostbusters with us. In the meantime, you keep watching movies, and we're going to see you next week.